Okay, another good morning here. This is the fourth one today, but we'll probably go out tomorrow morning. Um, Fukushima and Hanford, Washington, or the Hanford region in Washington, because it is a region. It is a bunch of cities. It is a nuclear wasteland. It is some of the most high-tech research labs in the nation. It is a commercial nuclear reactor site on top of being a Department of Energy, Department of Defense nuclear waste site. So the commercial nuclear plant was built at the end of these follies based upon the research from the follies of the military weapons research. And that is the same reactor as what blew up at Fukushima. So the only flooding risk that plant suffers or risks is dam failures or dam management failures on the headwaters before the generators. So those generators have to have massive amounts of cooling water. If they don't, the water they release is too hot and boils fish downstream. So one of the minimum flow requirements about the dams above Hanford is enough flow to keep to dilute the hot water coming out of the plant enough so that it doesn't destroy the river. So this is all thermal energy transfers through cooling cycles from the river cooling itself naturally, going over waterfalls exposed to air, other chilling effects, and in the summertime it's opposite. The water is picking up heat from the surrounding air. Now these are all minor temperature changes, but every one of these is watched because they have exponential impacts on some of the processes inside the reactors. So these are all very precisely monitored things that have to be managed for that reactor to run properly. Risk is if the reactors ran out of water, even if they were all shut down, if that river went dry, the cooling pools for all the spent fuel still have to be cooled, and the reactors themselves have to be cooled. The fuel that's in the reactors has a 4 to 10 year cool down cycle in a fuel pool, so it can be cooled and watched so it doesn't do silly things. Then it can come out of the pool maybe and go to some type of dry cast storage, which opens another can of worms. So each of these points is a rabbit hole. Okay, it's that metaphor for Mad Hatters that can throw conversations off. So if you introduce a rabbit hole, you really should be able to go down inside and talk to what's in the rabbit hole. And rabbit holes have snakes and scorpions and maybe baby bunnies. They might have a fox living down there. So you don't know what's in that rabbit hole, but you can kind of guess it's a rabbit hole, right? So I open those rabbit holes up in all these conversations because it's in those details and the cumulative effects of things that these conversations are. They are so tightly coupled, yet loosely coupled to everything around them, that to notice that there's some real physics people are paying attention to can get daunting. It's not depressing. It's how things work. You can tell through these videos my mind tends to work different when it sees things than a lot of other people's do. I don't look for supernatural in anything I see. I've never found it. If I saw it, I don't know if I'd recognize it, but it just was not necessary in any of this 50 or so videos that have been put out so far. So, Hanford area. The site, the whole area is on something called an alluvial floodplain. And these are fairly well studied plains where for thousands or millions of years very specific sediment actions happened in a wandering river base. So where I lived in Michigan was an alluvial plain. The bulk of Michigan is an alluvial plain. It's deposits from um, the actions of the glaciers that were there before we were around. Now, our Native American friends got to see some of this and spoke lore to some of these actions that they couldn't describe or they couldn't explain, but they could describe with the words they had at the time. So, just that is pulling the history out. That is noticing a little bit of history that comes from an ancient people's living in an area for beyond generations, and the subtleties they pick up, the subtleties of the stars moving in the skies, looked and talked about long enough with the language they had then to understand that it's very cyclical, it's very repetitive. We can make a calendar that will predict when we should plant, when we should forage, when herds are going to come through and we can harvest and hunt. So these great, huge, long earth cycles helped us to understand how to hunt, how to gather, how to plant. The planet guided us through these gently over some millions of years of human evolution. 20 million, I think, is the estimate for humans as we think of ourselves now. But the animals before us we learned from shared a whole lot. So, hey, thanks all. So, Hanford and Fukushima. So I spoke quickly to a flood risk, and the flood risk is to a nuclear power plant. It is to the dam that's below the Hanford site, two dams that are retaining materials at the bottom of that dam that you really don't want to disturb. You don't want to upset them. You don't want them in the moving water above them, because they're going to escape somehow. The methods to take this layers off the bottom of a moving, working riverbed are costly. We can do them, but they're costly. So there's a little bit of relationship to the ground materials around a nuclear facility that leaks different materials, the life of its operations, into the environment around it. So for groundwater contaminations, and this is a note in a lot of Florida that you'll see, is concerns over the isotopes of hydrogen. So, and we all know by now, right, there's H1, H2, and H3. Those are composites that are naturally occurring in such low abundances to be useless, but when we make the H2 and H3 in volume, we have deuterium and tritium. So when you talk about them like that, so if I say 2H2O, okay, that's a deuterium atom of hydrogen, or a deuterium isotope of hydrogen. It is also referred to as elements in the core of the sun, because those fundamental particles are made within the core of the sun. Just the most of them don't escape. They've got too much mass for the gravity equations going on. So we're going to come back to Fukushima and the Hanford nuclear waste site and all the layers to it. So I spoke a little bit to flooding, but I could expand on the flooding risks uh, I said, upriver dams, management of water resources so we don't destroy the river, we don't light a fuse in a vast nuclear wasteland to any number of triggers to the many components out there. A catastrophic dam failure above that site will absolutely wreak havoc on buried waste tanks that should never have been made, that were mixed in ways that we knew better than. The French did not do this mixing. That's the only saving grace in the French nuclear program. They did very little weapons research. They don't have the waste streams, the complicated waste streams that we allowed from nuclear weapons research production. Other fissile materials research like thorium, all of these, the research elements are just so important to our futures that the research has to be done. It is it's an easy decision to make if you meddle through. Why is CERN there? Someday we might be able to defy gravity with some type of engine we haven't invented yet. Recently, we've discovered that gravity is not a constant because gravitational waves moving through the solar system have rolled past our planet, and we're seeing them now. We've seen a gravitational wave cross Mars and cross our planet. I haven't seen the time relationship studies, but something triggered an earthquake on Mars, and that is my best guess, reasonably educated best guess of the cause of the earthquake. But it's a guess, and I will wait 2 years to see if the science with a correlation like that is made and be able to say, okay, God, am I patient? 2 fucking years for an answer to something that really doesn't matter as long as there's Twinkies on the grocery shelf. So, all right, a flooding potential. So, I spoke specifically to a Hanford flooding potential if the plant did get flooded. Depending on that flood, it will wash away, let's say, 1/2 of the facility, the ground, the roads, everything around it. But the structure is built to withstand a lot of this. So that 1/3, it might have a design basis engineering to be able to withstand a flood of 10 feet deep for 3 days. The emergency response would have to be able to get on top of those buildings during those 3 days to begin setting up the cooling required long term for those fuel pools. Because if they go underwater, if they are exposed to non-high purity water, you will start reactions in the fuel pools that have to be accounted for in the life cycle management of the fuel pools, of the fuel rods in the pools, which means now you have just committed resources and people and huge amounts of money, whether it's automatic or not. You have committed millions of dollars a year to watching something and follow the responses. Are we prepared? What would happen if that 10-foot flood happened? So now let's carry this flooding idea out. Fukushima was a tidal wave. It was a catastrophic event to the people and the nation of Japan. On top of that, a second catastrophic event, even more insidious, the full destruction of a nuclear plant's cooling capabilities for an extended period of time happened. We were not ready for the response. We still are not ready for the response. This I could go off into those PAGs. Go back some videos, you'll find the word PAG. That's a process that gets followed. It has a king at the top that has to sign. That is process. That process takes time. The process turns on money and resources necessary to do sciences that cost money and resources and take IQ is not it. You can see that. Your knowledge of shit is nothing. Your IQ is a type of measurement that falls in a bell curve, and I can make a bell curve out of bullshit. So give me the lab time. Give me a little of your shit and I'll go find some more and we'll play at a lab. Disposable income. That really is what I'm talking, is disposable income. Corporations can turn a $5 million minor budget study required to make them profitable. The federal government needs that ability. And it is going to go to contractors. When it goes to those contractors, its rules are strict. And if they are followed, they can work. We've been made to believe this stuff is nonsense, and it's not. So, flooding, back to Fukushima. You see these rabbit holes. In Vietnam, they were a lot of names, but they were rabbit holes. We sent some of the best trained German, not only shepherds, the best trained, most beautiful animals down in those holes so that we wouldn't die going in them. So, rabbit hole story. A cousin brought back a dog from Vietnam, German shepherd. The dog went over 6-foot fences. The dog spent months in rehab and retraining to not be a whole dog, to not have his basic instinct to go search and sniff and protect his buddy. And that's what the dog knew this. The dog knew that, you know, this was some shithole he was getting into. And you go crawl down a rat hole. You go listen to a man tell stories of a rat hole around a campfire for days or weeks while you're out in the field. And what you do and what you don't have to do and the things that are in those rabbit holes. So you listen to this and you get your face smeared around the shit down rabbit holes and the decisions you have to make and the absolutes and the relativity and relativistics. And in that instant, you're in combat. You've been trained for years of your life basically to kill, and to kill quickly, well, efficiently, and it's to keep your brother next to you alive. That's the fundamentals of being out in a combat situation. Your mind is trained, your mind is tuned, you have spent years. You can put on a gas mask faster than anybody has seen out in the commercial world, and they ask you to train putting on gas masks. So you go through why a beard maybe isn't a good idea, even if your company does allow it, because the fit of that gas mask means your life. Putting that gas mask on quickly, or another type of mask quickly, means that you're at the top of a fracking tower that's a dozen staircases to get to the top. If a specific alarm goes off anywhere in that plant or neighboring plants, there's a little plastic bag with a tiny little can of air. You find that plastic bag as quickly as you can. You put it over your head, and then you start moving down to the next set of landings on the platform, and that canister is empty, and you find the next set of airbags that are stationed there that somebody checks every week or month to make sure they're there, and you pull that next plastic bag over your head and pull a pin and begin down the next set. And you're doing this because you know to run you're going to burn up more oxygen. So you're moving as fast as you think your bottle's going to get you. you are worried about what you're walking into. So the heat and the vapors and the clouds typically rise, so getting off of that tower is huge. The next thing I need to know is how far the next emergency shelter is, because my airbags might lead me down to a Scott Air Pack. It's a backpack item in designated locations through the plant that I've memorized, that I've been walking by. That backpack gets put on, and if I still got anything left, I'm going to go back and try to rescue people that might have gotten harmed, that I had to walk by because we'd both be dead. So now I've got a Scott Air Pack. I can go help where's needed, or I can turn around and go find the next safety shelter, because that Scott Air Pack only gives me so much time outside. If I didn't don a safety suit to go with that air pack, I'm probably going to get chemical burns across any place, any skin exposed to air, or any clothing that has caught those chemicals. It's going to leach through the clothes, and I might start to get skin burns. So I had plastic surgery. I have damage to an eye from a caustic exposure that I never did find the source for. That's how fine it was. But it was in an instrument house. It was commissioning and rework phases of gas tubing. I had all the proper safety equipment on, but somehow some molecules, and that's all it takes, got on my skin, and one got on my eye, and that was enough material to burn a hole. But it wasn't enough material to burn through all the layers of my eye. It did burn my skin, and I had a little bit of plastic surgery for it. So that's one of the blemishes and the scars on the face. So the knowledge that I had built upon was the reason I was hired, that I got this position inside a chemical plant. But it also came from this situational awareness training you have, that you get. The military is a physical beast. You learn to be physical in a great many ways, whether it's for self-protection, or it's moving crates, it's carrying a backpack, it's marching 30 miles. It's what it takes, because you're here for something bigger than you. Full stuff. Admirable intentions to a lot of this, but it goes bad too. So flooding of a nuclear power plant. I touched briefly on the Hanford Reservation and the nuclear plants there's issue. If you go back and look out in Kansas, there's a nuclear plant there that has had 2 flooding incidents where they had to sandbag around the plant. The water was 8 to 10 feet above the base elevation of the plant. So no idea, if in its design basis, how long it would withstand if that 10-foot wall of water came across the whole plant. That was the risk of that plant. And in that it was in a floodplain, vehicles, either barges or aircraft, would have to take whatever there. And aircraft have a problem with smoke plumes coming from anything that's damaged. So that is not always a great option. But it's part of the logistics. It's a Donald Trump thing. You go dump water on it from an airplane kind of shit. And we tried that at Fukushima because there were no options. Even the helicopter pilots knew what they were getting into. As poorly informed as they were, they had training. They know. They had a damn good idea what they were getting into. And you know what? It's kind of collateral damage. It sucks, but that's what you can be. So you're aware of it, and you take a risk for that, whatever altruism, greater good drives your motivations for having been there in the first place. Because, anyone can run away. So there's a few plants out there in the Great Plains that have huge risks of flooding. And just as with the Hanford site, the nuclear contamination and waste over square miles from military research and commercial research that turned into a commercial nuclear facility a few decades later, all are at that flood risk. But the odds are what, 1 in 10,000? What's the year's odds? They've changed. So maybe those calculations that were done 50 years ago might ought to be reviewed. And we do this. And the NRC tells the plants, hey, you should. And the plants say, okay, I'll put it in my plans for 10 years from now. And the NRC says, oh, okay, because they're cutting our budget anyway. And if we ask you questions, I'll just cut the budget more. Well, this is going to be a long one because I'm going to try to stay focused. And you notice the roads and the doorways conversations open up. So yes, flooding is a risk. Take that flooding, extend it to coastal cities. We're talking about graduated sea rise with a greater risk of higher intensity storms all around this sea rise. So the military can plan on that. The industry can say, okay, I can put up 5-foot barriers, and statistically that's going to keep me dry for another 5 years, and then we'll play again. And we're going to open a risk interval up for those 5 years because we knew we didn't want to pay to do enough. We didn't want to go solar and risk solar being washed out to sea, because all of that we could go recover safely. We can remanufacture, reuse, and recover a good percentage of that. But no, that's not some's ideas. Or the wind, those cancer-causing windmills. I already went over the electromagnetic stuff. It's an inverse squared thing. Yes, it's there. No, it's not. Pick your battles, focus. So, flooding is one of the considerations, the design basis consideration. That design basis is a guarantee is a negotiation between engineers and money as to how much you can afford to do about this. What does it cost to make this right? And decisions and balances are made. There is no black and white decisions. There never was. There was never an absolute decision. There was not. Stop that. So, flood risk. The study of flooding, decadal, even generational, even global flooding attributes over time has been studied. It has been quantified. And we know there are odds. These are stochastic analysis that are spot on because we can test the results versus actual. So the odds are that one of those 500-year events is now a 250-year event, is now a 200-year event. And we have burned up 50 to 75 years of those 200-year catastrophic events. The evidence for that is in the news. It's called climate change. It is local effects to global climate because Mother Nature really doesn't care. She's writing the rules for us to read and understand. She is not following our rules. So, flooding on coastal plains, flooding on alluvial plains, say around the Great Lakes, that would be a very slow flooding because of the way the land distribution and elevations are. Flooding on a river would be a catastrophic event or a managed event where the flow rates through upriver systems overwhelm the management of the lower river systems and cause problems all the way out to the Gulf of Mississippi and any other river that flows through half a continent. I mean, the mighty Columbia River has, I don't know how many different names for different sections, but it starts up in Canada and spits out on the Oregon Washington coast and is one of the natural wonders of the planet. The work it did is only second to the Grand Canyon in grandeur when you go find and follow that river through. So travel, touch it, vacation with purpose. So everywhere I go, I gamble. I know a lot of the odds in the things I do, and it's just to me, it's a gentle understanding of the, you know, the workings of cool stuff. To others, it's a mystery. It's one syllable explanation. It's I don't understand this, and the result of I don't understand internally can be run away, can be argue with it, can be disagree, can be a diversion. It's my haircut. It's my green screen. Man, I should pay for another backdrop here, shouldn't I? So, flooding risks. Underneath all of that, flooding that we do hear news about, are aquifers. Aquifers are refed and replenished through all these actions. Some of the water in the lower aquifers is millions of years old, and we identify the age of the water through science. We can tell with a great accuracy how old a puddle of water is. Even though the puddle argues about the reason for its existence, we can still poke at it and learn. So flooding is a risk. It's a risk to houses. If you don't think that federal floodplain insurance applies to those corporations around you, if some type of flood insurance negotiated with all of the science I spoke to and the people and the profit centers involved don't consider these things, if the 7 global corporations that make the steel that everybody uses get together and decide to fix prices or break prices, if you don't think those conversations can happen, you're naive. So the only thing we have to correct that is good government. Good local government, good state government, good federal government, good global governance. So, oh my God, did I just become a globalist? Well, if you go there as a pejorative, then fuck you, to be polite. But you certainly can bring the question here. You bring your anti-globalist ideas to the table, because I don't mind talking about them. I will take you into a rabbit hole if you want to go there, and do my best to enlighten you on the joys of warfare. So, all right, this one's over half an hour right now. And as you can see in the meanderings, I could go on. And I probably will. But what could happen is people could take pieces of these and go forth and meme. I have the time for a discussion. I have the time to take some heat. I have the time to clarify my conversations, because if you haven't seen, I get confused. And if you haven't figured out why, God bless you. Peace out.